first glance, Mount Washington in New Hampshire doesn't seem like the type of place where lives are lost. Standing at 6,288 feet, 1,917 meters, it pales in comparison to the towering peaks of the Rockies or Alaska's remote summits. It seems approachable, even casual-like, something that could be hiked in a few hours with time left over for a warm lunch in town. But this peak hides a deadly secret. Despite its modest height, Mount Washington is one of the most lethal mountains. In the world when measured by deaths per vertical foot, it's earned this tragic distinction because of how quickly and how violently the weather can change. Hidden within the scenic presidential range of the White Mountains, Mount Washington is known not for its beauty, but for its brutality. Since the first recorded death in 1849, this mountain has claimed more than 160 lives. Rescue missions are routine. Even seasoned hikers are caught off guard. What makes it so dangerous isn't steep cliffs or technical climbs, it's the weather. This mountain regularly produces wind speeds that rival Category 5 hurricanes. Once held the world record for the fastest wind speed ever recorded. At ground level, 231 miles per hour, 372 kilometers per hour. And when those winds meet sudden drops in temperature, thick fog, and blinding snow, the result can be catastrophic. And yet at the summit, you'll find a weather observatory, a gift shop, and even a road leading all the way up. Feels safe deceptively. But make no mistake, Mount Washington has a reputation among rescue teams and hikers alike. It's not the height that kills, it's the illusion that you're in control. These are the chilling stories and fatal misjudgments from the most dangerous little mountain in the United States. Hidden behind the cozy appearance of the summit buildings and the friendly face of the visitor center lies a quiet but grim reminder of what this mountain truly is. Tucked inside is a framed record titled Mount Washington Casualties, listing the names of those who came to climb and never returned. The list stretches back nearly 200 years and it's still growing. The real danger here isn't the elevation, it's the environment. Mount Washington is often called the home of the worst weather on Earth, and it's not just a dramatic nickname. Wind speeds have reached a staggering 231 miles per hour, almost equivalent to an F5 tornado. These powerful gusts don't just happen once in a lifetime either. They hammer the summit on over 100 days each year. The cold? It's severe enough to freeze exposed skin in a matter of minutes. Even worse, the weather can change in a blink. A mild morning at the base can turn into a deadly whiteout within the hour. Many hikers caught in these blizzards never even see what hit them. Some collapse just steps from a shelter. Others are lost entirely, either falling from hidden ledges or being buried beneath snowdrifts. Only a few of these tragedies ever make the news, but the mountain remembers them all. And this is why Mount Washington has earned the haunting distinction of being the deadliest low-altitude peak in the United States. But long before rescue teams, warning signs, and visitor maps existed, the Abenaki people had already grasped its power. They called it Ajokochuk, the place of the Great Spirit. To them, the summit wasn't a destination, it was sacred, ground not to be disturbed. And maybe they were right all along, long before colonists staked their claim or tourists sipped coffee at the summit. Mount Washington was known to those who respected it most, the native Abenaki people. They believed that great and powerful spirits roamed the peak, where the mist danced with the stones and the winds roared with the voices of another world. To them, the summit was sacred off limits, untouchable, and for good reason.
Ow.
Even in ancient times, stories of the mountain's unpredictable, violent nature spread across tribal lands. Its reputation as a place of awe and peril was cemented long before European ships ever appeared on the horizon. In 1524, Italian navigator Giovanni da Verrazzano became the first European to document the white-capped peak from far out in the Atlantic. But it wasn't until the 1600s that settlers began inching into the region. With them came new names, foreign maps, and fresh ambition. By the 18th century, the mountain was renamed in tribute to George Washington, before he had even led a revolution. One of the earliest claims of a European summit attempt came from Derby Field in 1642, an English settler in New Hampshire. Whether he truly reached the top remains debated, but his stories of powerful winds and lifeless granite stirred curiosity and fear. As the centuries turned, the myth turned magnetic. By the early 1800s, Mount Washington had become a rite of passage for adventurers, naturalists, and thrill seekers. In 1852, a modest stone shelter, the Tip-Top House, was built atop the peak to host daring visitors. Not long after, the first road was carved up the mountain, followed by the world's first mountain climbing cog railway. But with this newfound accessibility came consequences. For every tourist drawn in by the view, someone underestimated the wrath hidden in the clouds. And as the crowds swelled, so did the number of names etched into the mountain's long, cold list of casualties. In an age of satellite forecasts, thermal gear, GPS navigation, and modern rescue crews, you'd expect the dangers of mountains to fade into memory. But Mount Washington defies that expectation. Even with every technological advantage, this peak stubbornly clings to its title as one of the deadliest small mountains in the world. Today it stands as a strange contradiction, part museum, part battleground, both a tourist spot and a tomb. Visitors come for the beauty, but some never leave. So what makes Mount Washington so uniquely treacherous? It's not a marketing exaggeration to say the mountain has some of the worst weather conditions anywhere on the planet. That claim has been backed by hard data. In 1934, scientists at the Mount Washington Observatory recorded wind speeds of 231 miles per hour, 372 kilometers per hour winds, so fierce they could tear equipment loose or knock a person off the ground. This wasn't a passing gust, it was a sustained fury. To this day, it remains the fastest wind ever recorded at ground level outside of a tornado. And the temperature's brutal. Thermometers have dropped to minus 50 degrees Fahrenheit, minus 45.5 degrees Celsius, but it gets worse when the wind gets involved. The wind chill has made it feel like minus 100 degrees Fahrenheit, minus 73 degrees Celsius, conditions in which exposed skin can freeze in minutes, and decision-making becomes clouded fast. Even on a sunny day at the trailhead, hikers can reach the summit only to be greeted by whiteout snow, invisible paths, and instant peril. That's why no matter how many people return safely each year, Mount Washington never loses its grip on the list of America's deadliest climbs. Despite its modest height, Mount Washington turns into a snowbound monster for much of the year. Even in the heart of summer, yes, even July, you might find yourself wading through waist-deep snowdrifts. The mountain averages around 280 inches, 711 centimeters of snowfall annually. But it's not just the snow itself that causes danger. The constant, ferocious winds reshape the terrain daily, blowing snow into massive drifts up to 40 feet 12 meters deep. These drifts often bury trail signs and landmarks, leaving hikers completely disoriented and intense. Whiteout conditions. And if you think climbing this small peak is a walk in the park, think again. Every ascent involves an unforgiving vertical climb. Many popular trails begin almost at sea level and require hikers to gain more than 4,000 feet, 1,200 meters, in elevation over a short distance. In fact, the Tuckerman Ravine Trail is so steep, its elevation gain per mile rivals that of Denali's notorious West Buttress route. Once you pass the 4,400-foot mark, the forest disappears. You're now above the tree line, completely exposed to Mount Washington's brutal winds and unpredictable weather. There's no cover, no safe refuge until you reach the summit. Only jagged boulders and drop-offs waiting for one wrong step. An average hike takes around 8 hours, and that's only if everything goes right. Losing the trail to snow, getting injured, or simply running out of daylight could turn a routine hike into a life-threatening situation. What makes it all worse? It's just a few hours from Boston. You can drive there, train to the top, snap a photo, sip some cocoa. From the outside, it looks like a charming day trip. But the truth is, it's a mountain that's claimed over 160 lives. and it doesn't care how experienced or close to civilization you are.
Mount Washington recorded its first fatality back in October of 1849. When 29-year-old English traveler
Frederick Strickland took on the climb despite bone-chilling early winter weather. While he did manage to reach the summit, it was during the descent that tragedy unfolded. Somewhere deep within a ravine, Strickland became lost. The thick fog and whipping winds had wiped away all familiar paths. Exhausted, freezing, and alone, he wandered aimlessly until his body finally gave out. Days later, rescuers discovered his frozen remains lying lifeless in a riverbed. The mountain struck again just 6 years later, claiming its first female victim, 23-year-old Lizzie Bourne. Accompanied by her uncle and cousin, Lizzie had set out with the goal of watching sunrise from the summit's tip-top house, but she was already at a disadvantage. Burdened by restrictive Victorian-era clothing and living with a known heart condition, the odds were never in her favor. As the group climbed, the skies darkened and freezing winds battered them mercilessly. By late afternoon, the trail had completely disappeared in thick cloud cover. With no visibility and nightfall approaching, the group hastily built a shelter from loose stones to shield themselves from the cold. As they huddled together through the bitter night, Lizzie quietly slipped into unconsciousness and passed away from hypothermia. When the morning fog cleared, they realized the cruel truth. The summit lodge had been mere meters away the entire time, close enough that they could have reached safety. If only they had known. Despite centuries of documented tragedies like these, Mount Washington continues to silently collect lives even today. On the morning of June 17, 2024, 53-year-old Jesse messaged his longtime neighbor and close friend, Dennis, sharing his excitement for an upcoming adventure. Jesse, a seasoned hiker, had developed a deep affection for New Hampshire's White Mountains ever since relocating to Massachusetts in the late 1990s. Many of his weekends were spent heading north, sometimes with his wife and 3 children, and often with his teenage son, who had inherited his love for intense multi-day treks. Even when Jesse wasn't out on the trail, hiking remained a part of his life. He regularly followed outdoor channels on YouTube, researched the latest in ultralight hiking gear, and maintained a bucket list of dream climbs, Mount Kilimanjaro among them. A large map of New Hampshire's 4,000-foot peaks hung in his kitchen, with 21 of them already checked off by mid-2024. That weekend, Jesse had his sights set on one of the region's most demanding and legendary routes. Presidential Traverse, a 20-mile, 32-kilometer trail that winds across 7 exposed summits, including Mount Madison. He had originally planned to hike it with his son, but when scheduling conflicts arose, Jesse decided to take on the challenge alone. At around 9 a.m. that morning, he texted Dennis a photo of his fully packed gear, his face lit with excitement. By Friday night, he had reached a tent site nestled beneath hardwoods near the base of Mount Madison. Later, he sent his family a short drone video capturing the serene wilderness that surrounded him. The following morning, Jesse began his climb. The skies were overcast, but conditions seemed manageable for now. As Jesse continued ascending Mount Madison, he paused to capture a few triumphant selfies from the summit. But the celebration was short-lived. The sky, once just overcast, soon turned into a relentless downpour. The surrounding peaks vanished behind thick clouds, and gusty winds began tearing at his jacket hood. Still, determined, Jesse forged ahead first, across Mount Adams, then over the rough terrain of Mount Jefferson. But this was when his hike turned from adventurous to alarming. At 2:50 p.m., Jesse texted his wife with a message that hinted at the growing danger. Got drenched. 3 miles away from any help, getting worried about hypothermia. He also asked her to keep an eye on his phone's live tracking, a precaution that now carried immense weight. Then, at 4:26 p.m., another message came through, pushing towards Mount Washington, or maybe the Lake of the Clouds hut. Unbeknownst to Jesse, the weather was deteriorating even faster than he could anticipate. Atop the mountain, winds howled at 80 miles per hour, 129 kilometers per hour, and temperatures plunged into the danger zone. Freezing sleet and sudden snowfall whipped across the open ridges, bringing the wind chill down to a brutal -5 degrees Fahrenheit, -21 degrees Celsius. For someone already soaked and alone, it was a deadly mix. And then, at 5:30 p.m., Jesse sent one final chilling message, one that would shake his loved ones to the core. In trouble. Can't move. His wife then immediately asked if she should call for rescue, and Jesse simply replied yes, could die. She then called 911, only to be told that rescuers needed a precise location before they could launch a mission. Afterward, his wife frantically tried to guide authorities using his last known coordinates from Jesse's phone. And their son helped pinpoint the longitude and latitude using satellite imagery. As this was going on, as they scrambled to coordinate, his wife sent more messages, asking if he was awake, and for a time, there was no reply. Then finally, there was another message from Jesse. I am lost. Need help? This would be his final communication. Lieutenant Mark of New Hampshire Fish and Game received the report at 6:34 p.m. Rescue crews then loaded up a truck with tire chains and fought their way up the ice-glazed Mount Washington Auto Road. 4 hours later at 10:38 p.m., after hours of brutal searching, the first team found Jesse lying on the Gulfside Trail near Mount Clay, and he was unresponsive and deep into hypothermia. They then constructed a makeshift shelter to shield him from the storm and tried desperately to rewarm him. He was then evacuated back to the base of the mountain, and from there, he was rushed to the hospital. But despite every effort, Jesse couldn't be saved. He was pronounced dead after several hours of attempted resuscitation. He had been less than a mile from the Lake of the Clouds hut, where he likely would have been safe. In the aftermath, understandably, Jesse's death sent shockwaves through his family and the hiking community that admired him. He wasn't some reckless adventurer or a thrill-seeker unprepared for the mountains. He was thoughtful, experienced, prepared, and still. He died anyway. And just 2 months later, Mount Washington struck again. In August 2024, a 72-year-old man decided to take the cog railway up to the summit and then hike down under his own power. This is a fairly common thing for tourists of the mountain, and it was a decision that seemed harmless at the time and should have been harmless. Again, this was August, so the man was dressed only in jeans, a thin raincoat, and hiking boots. As he descended, though, the rain turned to sleet, and the fog thickened, and the summit's mild winds grew stronger. And worst of all, temperatures then plummeted to below freezing with the wind chill. A fellow hiker found his body the next day sprawled along the Gulfside Trail, just half a mile from the summit, close enough that he might have survived had he turned back sooner, or maybe he was already on his way back. Several months earlier, in March of 2024, 2 hikers were attempting to ski down the Tuckerman Ravine after a hard-earned climb up Left Gully, the snowpack. Though weakened by a week of warm temperatures and then flash frozen under new ice, had turned the slope into a death trap. Both hikers seemed to have slipped simultaneously, or the snow gave way. The two went into an uncontrolled slide, 600 vertical feet, or 183 meters over hard snow, sharp rocks, and hidden crevasses. One of them was killed instantly in the slide. Then, just minutes later, in a tragic coincidence, another hiker fell in nearby Hillman's Highway and suffered critical injuries. And then there's Sarah, who didn't slip or get lost. In June of 1994, after finishing a skiing run on the head wall of Tuckerman Ravine, Sarah was making her way down when the mountain dropped a 15-ton chunk of ice on her. Falling ice in Tuckerman Ravine isn't a rare event, especially in late spring and early summer. And on that day, warnings had already been issued for unusually dangerous conditions. And so, several massive ice blocks broke free from the head wall, some big enough to crush entire groups of climbers. Sarah never stood a chance. A single erratic piece of falling ice struck her down in an instant. Avalanches, too, are a regular occurrence in the mountain. In April of 2019, 32-year-old skier ventured alone into the Raymond's Cataract area, northeast of Tuckerman Ravine. This is a known avalanche risk zone, and sometime that day, a slide buried him under a feet of compacted snow. By the time search and rescue teams found him after an exhausting 90-minute dig, he was in cardiac arrest. And despite every effort to save his life, he was pronounced dead. Not every incident comes with a thunderous fall or a dramatic rescue attempt, though. Sometimes, it's just quiet, creeping exhaustion. In June of 1933, Simon Joseph, who was just 19 years old, set off with friends toward the Lake of the Clouds hut without food and miserable weather. Rain and cold battered the teenagers as they ascended, and the group eventually drifted apart, weakened by hunger and fatigue. Simon then accidentally veered off the trail into the mist, missing a critical turn. A massive search was launched, but quickly hampered by dense fog and dangerous winds. Days later, his body was found heartbreakingly close to the hut. If he had kept to the path, he might have lived. And in fact, even those whose job it is to save others aren't safe from Mount Washington. Albert Dow, a volunteer with the mountain rescue service, set out to find two missing climbers in January of 1982. The teenagers were trapped somewhere in the upper portion, and avalanche warnings were issued, and the mountain was raging. Visibility was also almost zero, and yet still, Albert and his team climbed. Albert, however, would never make it back. On the descent, he and a fellow rescuer were caught in an avalanche near Lionhead. Albert was found 2 hours later, buried under 3 feet of heavy snow. He became the first and still the only Mount Washington rescue volunteer to die during an active mission. And the climbers he was trying to save ended up badly frostbitten, but alive. So you can look at Mount Washington's record and start to wonder, how does a mountain barely taller than a Denver suburb keep killing people like this? The danger isn't just in the ice or the wind, though both are brutal. It's also in how harmless Mount Washington appears to be. It doesn't look like a killer. There's no need for weeks of preparation or flights into remote wilderness. You can drive up to the trailhead, start your hike by mid-morning, and even take a train or car straight to the summit if you wanted to. There's a gift shop at the top. There are tourists. It feels like a family-friendly destination. And that's exactly what makes it so deadly. People assume that a place with a paved road can't possibly be that dangerous. They see clear skies at the base and figure it'll stay that way. But this mountain doesn't play by normal rules. The weather shifts in moments, blue skies become whiteout snow, mild breezes turn into screaming gusts, and even seasoned hikers fall victim. Jesse had climbed dozens of peaks. He knew the terrain. He was physically strong. But Mount Washington still beat him, and he's not alone. It keeps happening. Hikers misjudge the conditions, underestimate the time they'll need, or trust forecasts that become obsolete in an hour. Between 1928 and 2024, the stats show a chilling trend. Nearly half of all deaths on the mountain came from long, uncontrolled falls, sliding down steep, icy terrain. Not far behind, hypothermia and avalanches tie as the second leading causes, each accounting for 24% of all fatalities. Hazards like sudden exposure, falling ice, hidden crevasses, even heart attacks have taken lives on Mount Washington. In fact, heart-related incidents are among the more frequent causes of death here, with over 24 cases on record. But the strange thing is, this mountain doesn't look like a killer. It's not some Himalayan monster or icy titan like Everest or K2. On a clear day, it almost seems peaceful, framed by blue skies and gentle ridgelines. But don't be fooled. Mount Washington doesn't just take lives in roaring storms or freezing whiteouts, though it's certainly capable of that. It can claim a life on a quiet, sunny morning, on a bright day when you can see the ocean glinting on the horizon, when you're a mile from shelter, 100 feet from a warm hut, or even mid-text, telling loved ones, "I'm okay." Its victims aren't thrill seekers or unprepared adventurers. They're hikers with experience, travelers with gear, even locals who thought they knew the mountain. Some came to stretch their legs after a scenic ride, others came prepared for the worst standstill. It wasn't enough. What makes Mount Washington so deadly is the lie it tells with its appearance, and that illusion that calm, welcoming look continues to draw people in. And that's why this small mountain remains one of the most dangerous in North America. Thanks for sticking around until the end. Got a story we should tell? There's a link below to share it. But if you'd like to support the channel, we'd love to have you join as a member or on Patreon. Until next time, stay safe and stay curious.